By May of 1940, World War II had been escalating for nearly a year. The British Parliament was in shambles, on the very verge of imploding in on itself. The people were frightened because there was no one who could step up to one of the largest threats of the 20th century, until one man decided he would stand against a tyrant, and that was Winston Churchill. Now, Churchill wasn't perfect. He was rough and rugged, to say the least, with a litany of military and political disasters even before the war had started. Things got so bad for the British, in fact, that in that same month of May, they were on the verge of capitulating to the Nazi peril. They were this close to negotiating peace terms with Germany because they doubted that they could carry on the struggle. Even Churchill himself doubted that Britain might have survived the fight. But in the face of his doubt, Churchill stood firm and he carried on, and would become one of the greatest wartime heroes and leaders in history. And we all know how that story ends. Doubt. And it's something that we have all faced as men. It's something that I've faced. Even opening up a personal part of my testament is I wrestle with low self-esteem. So I wrestle with anxiety. I'm an overthinker. I'm very critical of myself, and I'm very hard on myself. And I don't say that to throw myself a pity party. I intend to be vulnerable to show that doubt is something that I experience. In fact, even the past several months, I've been going through my own season of doubt, and out of it, this was born. In fact, I have to tell this story. Curtis is already laughing because he knows what I'm about to say. But when I brought it before the staff and I brought it before Curtis for prayer, the only thing Curtis said to me was, write a sermon. So if you're going to take your problems to Pastor Curtis, just know ahead of time you're probably going to get some homework, all right? So be wary of that. But there's two kind of doubts we really face in our spiritual life, doubting God and doubting ourselves. And today we're going to focus on the latter. So how many of y'all have read Animal Farm? George Orwell's Animal Farm. Most of y'all. If you haven't read it yet, highly recommend you go read it. But in Animal Farm, basically is an oversimplification. There's this farm, the animals take over, and they start running the farm for themselves. But on this farm, there's a horse named Boxer. Now, Boxer's the biggest and he's the strongest animal on the farm, but he's also not the smartest. And whatever comparison you're making in your mind, don't make it. But what Boxer always tells himself is, I will work harder. I will work harder. Because he wants to serve the farm. He wants to serve the animals because he's big and because he's strong. But what happens to Boxer is he winds up hurting himself. And because he's hurt, he can't work as hard. He can't be as strong. And he begins spiraling and spiraling until basically he works himself to death. And why I paint these pictures is to show how we can even get in our own way sometimes. How doubt we have against ourselves can hinder us from the potential that Jesus calls us towards. Where even though we might be on the right path, if we allow doubt to rule over us, it can knock us off or down off course. Even though doubt can be a hard hill to climb, there's going to be a lot of effort. There's a lot of wrestling. But what I want us to see as I start this out is as we work through this, how even something such as doubt can be an incredible tool to strengthen our faith. How even doubt can be used to propel our faith to even deeper capacity in relationship and partnership with Jesus. So if you have your Bibles, we'll be starting in Matthew 14, verse 25. Starting in Matthew 14, 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat and the wind died down, then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Now I want to stop here and let's mull over this passage for a little bit, because at least in my experience, from what I've heard, we talk about Peter a lot in this passage, and not in a good light, because man, sometimes we just love to beat down on Peter in this. How many of us have heard at some point or another, in some form or fashion, of a sermon saying Peter should have just had more faith than Jesus? Peter should have just had more faith in Jesus. Well, didn't Peter have enough faith to step out into the water in the first place? Because me personally, I don't think we're asking the right question. I don't think it's the question of whether did Peter have faith in Jesus. I think it's more along the lines, did Peter lose faith in himself? Did Peter's own doubt get in the way of his walk with Jesus? Again, we're so quick to beat up Peter, but who's even to say that Jesus was angry with him to begin with? Who knows? I like to imagine Jesus might have had a smile on his face when he said, "Why did you doubt?" I digress, but the point being, when doubt eventually comes onto our radar, how is that going to affect our walk with Jesus? Well, where does doubt come from? It can come from a number of places. It can come as a manifestation from within ourselves, but doubt can also come from the enemy. Spiritual warfare is all around us, men. And I know that's a deep topic, but we need to talk about it sometimes. We are in a war, and the enemy will use whatever tactic he can to gain advantage over us. Doubt can be one of those tactics through deception. In his agenda to steal, kill, and destroy, the enemy may plant seeds of doubt in your heart to try to pry you away from God. Those seeds, if left unchecked and unchallenged, over time can wreak havoc on your spiritual life. Because it might not be a relationship problem. You and God might be good. Y'all might be doing good. But then here comes the enemy. He's throwing pebbles. He's tapping on your window. He's stirring things up to get your attention. Doing something to try to get you distracted from God. He might be stirring up the wind, stirring up waves to take your eyes off of Jesus and off the straight and narrow. As Pastor Earl McClellan once said, when the church gains ground, the enemy does not fight fair. Even 1 Peter 5:8, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Now, I must admit, I kind of don't like that translation, because when you think about it, does a lion roar before it pounces? Why would a lion alert its prey to its presence? Because we definitely know the enemy doesn't do that. But then with that, that makes me think of Genesis 4:6, when the Lord's talking to Cain. If you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. In reality, the enemy is that beast that is crouching at the door. And if you're standing at the door, that also means you're not sitting at the table with God. Because if you give that door just a sliver of an opening, that enemy is going to punch his way through and pounce on you. The enemy is waiting at the door. So is your door open, or is it shut closed in the face of the enemy? There's an older saying, when the devil ignores you, you might be doing something wrong. Now, that's a very broad topic. I don't exactly have that much time to talk about it. But one thing for sure, because if you're doing right by God, the enemy is going to wait by that door, just waiting for the opportunity to pounce if you give it to him. Now, that's not to say Satan himself is after you. Calm down. But he does have an army that studies you and watches your every move, all in order to find out what best to get a hold of you. Like watching game film after a football or basketball game, they study you to figure out what strategy they need that will work best for you to get you off the straight and narrow. Now, I'm glossing over a lot. Spiritual warfare is a big topic, but we've kind of have to start moving on a little bit. But there's a really good book I have to recommend by J.P. Pokluda called Your Story Has a Villain. If you want to do some more deep diving into spiritual warfare and what that looks like in our everyday life, that's a great place to start. And all that might sound scary, but we just have to remember how much bigger our God really is. Satan has no power over you, Luke 10:19. But take heed. The devil can't make you do anything. All he has to do is to get you to convince yourself to do it. That includes doubt. Maybe those seeds of doubt have been planted, but it is up to you to decide what you do with them. Your response is your responsibility, as we like to say here at Harvest. The enemy may try to convince us that we aren't enough, that we can't do it, but that's not true. Maybe even trying to convince you that you've already fallen out with God, but that isn't true either. So that reminds me of the parable of the weeds in Matthew 13, just the chapter before, where Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the weeds sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" An enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, do you want us to go and pull them up? No, he answered, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. While the enemy plants seeds of doubt, what are we to do? Because if we react on our own premonition, we now run the risk of pulling up the wheat alongside the weeds. But if we respond accordingly to God's truth and trusting in that truth, in due time, we will be able to tell the difference between the wheat and the weeds, and not only tell the difference, but separate and burn the weeds of doubt in our lives. That yes, there might be doubt growing in us, but at the very same time, the truth of God is growing right alongside it. Again, my point for today is how even something like doubt can be used to strengthen our faith. Because the truth is, doubting is okay. It is okay to doubt. I know we're hitting some hard stuff this morning, but let me provide you with a reassurance. Doubting is okay. Pastor Greg Groeschel, he actually does a really good series on doubt. It actually drew a lot of inspiration for me when writing this. But one thing he says is that stuck with me is doubt doesn't make you a bad Christian. It just means you're human. It is okay to feel doubt. It is just a part of life. So if you're feeling doubtful, don't disqualify yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Don't count yourself out of the race. It is just a part of being a human being. Because when we begin encountering doubt, we begin asking questions. And when we ask questions, we get answers. Again, it goes back to how we respond to doubt. It is the confrontation of doubt that keeps us afloat. If we do nothing with it, it'll grow out of control like weeds in a garden. But in our response, if we ask the right questions, we'll get the right answers from God. What we find is that when we confront doubt head on, we find that it only has as much power over us as we allow it to have. We get to choose how deep into relationship with God we go. And asking those questions about doubt is how we continue that pursuit of relationship. So how deep will you go? God will meet us where we're at, but he's not going to leave us there. Relationship with God is constant growth. It's constant change throughout whatever season of life, even seasons of doubt. Your relationship with God is up to you. We need to take the time to really analyze and reflect on our relationship. How are we pursuing Jesus? How can we pursue more? What can we do to deepen and grow our intimate relationship with Christ? Because if we're not pursuing Jesus, we're drifting from him. Asking those questions can be how we engage and pursue, because God can handle your doubt. God is big enough to handle your doubt. Do not doubt that for a second. He wants you to lean into him, questions and all. God is okay with you asking those questions because he has the answer waiting for you, and he will show you at just the right time. Because when we begin asking questions, we begin finding answers. When wrestling with doubt, we begin to gain experience and understanding. And when you gain experience, you begin to get a better idea at the root of the problem. Such as an example, I have spent several years experience gardening and landscaping. And I can tell you there are certain species of weed that you can't just cut away. No matter how much you pull or tug at them, they keep coming back. There are some species that you have to pull up root and stem entirely to be able to get rid of them. And so when I started digging, I really realized what had been going on and where it kind of started. Because within a single month, I realized that two very encouraging people in my life had moved on into a different season. I'm sure some of y'all, or most of y'all, remember Pastor Brett. Brett was a big encouragement to me when I first started here at Harvest Connection. And it was difficult to watch him step into a new season of life. I still see him every now and then. He's doing great. But not having him around as much really kind of did take a toll on me. And another dear friend of mine, her name was Avery. She helped me through a lot of difficult times. And having to watch her move away was very difficult to lose that encouraging person in my life. But it was in that digging, it was in that confrontation when I really began to realize that I was doubting myself. I was doubting who I was, not just as a person, but even who I was in God. So when you're drowning in doubt, are you going to sink or are you going to swim? Which brings me to my first point, is call on the name. Now, I don't mean that in the sense of like, oh, just pray more. What I mean is, when we pursue God in relationship, do we know him well enough to where we are familiar with the character of God? Are we on such an intimate level with our Creator that we understand what we need from him in certain situations? God has many different names with many different meanings. Is our relationship deep enough where we have an intimate understanding of those names? Not only that, do you know your situation enough to know what you need? Such as, my doubt might look different than Jacob's doubt. Jacob might look different than Oscar's doubt. All of our doubts might look different. All of our situations might look different. So do we know what we need from our Creator? Because once we take the time to understand God's character, we're going to learn how he will deliver us. Because God has many names. Yahweh, he who was, who is, and who is to come. Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals. Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is my banner. El Shaddai, the Lord God Almighty, and the list goes on and on and on. Do you need God's strength? Do you need his love? Do you need his provision? By diving into more intimate relationship, we can rely upon God's good names to carry us through the storms. Because understanding the character of God is what ails our anxiety. So deepen your relationship with God so that you may get to know him better and be ready for the day the storm comes. Because what kind of God am I putting my trust into? Well, good news, there's a book that tells you exactly the kind of God you can put your trust into. In fact, there are 66 books that tell you the kind of God that you can put your trust into. In the face of doubt, you choose how deep you get to press into it. McKenna Murphy, one of our college students from Rise, she once said several weeks back, desperation can be the formation of a new foundation. If it feels like you're drowning, how desperate are you going to be to climb onto the foundation of Jesus? How is the doubt in your life going to affect your relationship with God? Are you going to loosen your grip and let the storm take you? Or are you going to tighten that grip? And are you going to dig deep and pursue relentlessly, even in the pain of doubt? Because when you keep your eyes on Jesus, you're going to recognize when he is moving his hand through the storm. And secondly is wrestle with it. I talked a lot this morning about engaging, confronting, and wrestling. So let's talk about it some more. Because in our walk with Jesus, from the very start till the day we go home, we never stop wrestling with God. Even the name itself, Israel, in the Hebrew means to wrestle with God. So not only was Jacob renamed into Israel, he who wrestles with God, but an entire nation, an entire people group was called Israel, an entire people named to wrestle with God. Even looking at the prophet Habakkuk, during Habakkuk's time, the Babylonian Empire was unstoppable. They were kicking tail and taking names with no one to stop them, and Judah was next up on the menu. And if you want to talk about doubt, go read the book of Habakkuk. If you can sum up the book of Habakkuk into one sentence, because I also have to preface, Habakkuk's name also means to wrestle and engage. But if you want to look at the book of Habakkuk, talk about wrestling with doubt. With Babylon on the doorsteps of Jerusalem, Habakkuk writes in chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. Talk about some serious doubt. But how truthful is this in the sense where we've all had these moments where we look around the world or we look around the situations in our lives and we've asked these kinds of questions. Sometimes it might not feel like God isn't there, but that doesn't mean that he isn't. I want to present y'all with a question. If we felt God's presence all the time, 24/7, would we even have faith? Really think about that for a second. If we felt God's presence all the time, would we even have faith? That is why we have faith. The assurance for what we do not see. We might not see how God might be moving in certain seasons, but that doesn't mean he isn't. It is because we do not see that we have faith. Wrestle with the fact that there will be times where we have to walk by faith and not by sight. Because we know that even through the storms, we have the hope that Jesus is going to pull us out. And as you're walking through those storms, My third point is sing through the storm. After all, life can be pretty dreary if you don't have a song to sing, right? I always like to keep some songs in my back pocket that I like to go back to, especially during times of trouble or difficult seasons. Now, for the sake of time and mercy upon your ears, I'm not going to sing them, but that is also the reason a lot of the Psalms were written, to be recalled back to in times of trouble. But one of my favorite songs, I actually wanted to try and play it, but I kind of forgot about copyright laws. Those are a thing. And so, but one of my favorite songs to go back to is I Am a Poor Wayfaring Stranger. And it's quite a bit older song. It still resonates with me to this day. But one of the verses reads out, I know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way is rough and steep, but golden fields lie just before me, where God's redeemed shall ever sleep. Now, I've carried that song through many a storm in my life, and I still hold on to the hope of it every single day. But we have to remember as we sing through the storm, worship is still worship. You might be crying, you might be laughing, you might be screaming, you might be yelling, you might be singing. Worship is still worship if it's worship to God. Whatever emotion you have, there is space for it in the Psalms, and not only that, space for the expression of it to God, because worship is still worship if it's worship to God. By singing through the storm, it redirects your focus. The more you focus on the waves, the larger they're going to appear. The more you focus on the wind, the stronger it's going to seem to blow. So sing as you make your way through the storm to give you hope and strengthen your faith as you make your way. There's a famous speech by a man named Admiral William McRaven. While giving this speech, and y'all can go find it on YouTube, it's not hard to find, but he goes back to his training as a Navy SEAL. And in one training exercise, they had to sit in freezing cold mud for 15 hours. And while it looked like some were about to quit, others began to sing. And for the next 8 hours while they sang, Admiral McRaven recalls, the mud seemed a little warmer, the wind a little more tamer, and the dawn not so far away. If there's one thing that this point should stand for, it is the power of hope. The hope that a simple song or even the hope of a single person can be so impactful. So imagine the hope that Jesus gives, that even the hope of a mustard seed can fortify us. Even though it might be small, it is unstoppable. So as you hold on to that seed of hope, sing through the storm. And my last point is God can do this all day. Now, if that sounds a little familiar to you, let me explain. So I'll confess a little bit. I'm actually quite a big fan of the Marvel movies, of the superhero movies, even if I think they've gone downhill over several years, but that's a story for another day. But one of my favorite superheroes was always Captain America. You know, just that kid who grew up rough and just had the opportunity to do something right. But Captain America was always my favorite. And one of the things that also made him my favorite was a quote that he always said. Every time Captain America got knocked down, he'd get back up and he'd say the exact same thing. I can do this all day. And even chasing a rabbit for a little bit, even looking at Ephesians 6, talking about the armor of God, you know, the shield of faith was always my favorite part of that passage. That's probably why I like Captain America so much, is because talking about that shield of faith, that just kind of resonated with me. But at the end of the day, it's not so much about the armor we're given, but it's about the one who gave us the armor. Proverbs 24:16, for though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again, but the wicked stumble when calamity strikes. You fall 7 times, you get up 8. You fall 77 times, you get up 78. But don't let your pride get in the way of that. It'll only lead to you falling again. Whether or not you can do this all day is not up for debate. It will do nothing but drain you. Every man has their breaking point. But God, on the other hand, God can do this all day. In fact, that is what he loves to do by encouraging and picking up his children in their time of need. It was Jesus who pulled Peter out of the water. Peter didn't pull himself out of the water. It was Jesus. And even going back to Matthew in verse 31 and chapter 14, immediately Jesus pulled Peter out. It was immediately that Jesus was there to help Peter when he was drowning in his doubt. And he's going to do it again and again and again. All you have to do is just reach for him. All you have to do is just accept his hand. God can do this all day. We just have to take his hand that he would pull us from drowning in our doubt. So as you go forward, I just want you to know that. And I imagine most of y'all know this a lot better than me, but it doesn't get easier. You just get stronger. Doubt isn't something you deal with once or try to swallow all in one bite, but it will continually show up in your life. But you'll come back from the dark somehow, finally living in the here and now, with no sign of a thundercloud following you. Doubt is not the antithesis of faith, but merely a tool to strengthen it. So may the seeds of doubt that have been planted in your heart blossom into flowers of faith from which fruit can grow. Remember that it is okay to doubt. That's just what it means to be human. As I was putting this message together, I read this quote, and I just had to throw it in, and I thought the end would be the best place. The deeper our faith, the more we must endure. The deeper our hope, the more prone we are to despair. The deeper our love, the more pain its loss will bring. These are a few of the paradoxes we must hold as human beings. If we refuse to hold them in the hopes of living without doubt, despair, and pain, we also find ourselves living without hope, faith, and love. You see, doubt, after all this, gives us the opportunity to show God how much faith, hope, and love we have for him. Doubt is not just something to overcome, but it is the chance to deepen our faith in Christ. So how are you going to respond to that doubt? Are you going to let the waves consume you? Or are you going to reach out to Jesus because he's reaching out to you? Say, thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for those joining us online.